In August of 1958, the President of the United States signed a law making it a federal crime to gamble on the price of a vegetable. Not a drug, not a weapon, a vegetable, the onion. That law is still on the books today. In America, right now, you are free to trade futures contracts on wheat, on cattle, on crude oil, on orange juice, on lean hogs, even on the weather. There is exactly one agricultural product in the entire country on which that is a federal offense, and it is sitting in a paper bag in your kitchen. To understand why, you have to go back 3 years to a cold storage warehouse in Chicago. In the 1950s, onions were the single most traded product on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. Not corn, not cattle, onions. By 1955, they accounted for something like a fifth of everything the exchange traded for one simple reason. Onions rot. A crop that rots has a price that swings wildly, and a price that swings wildly is a price a gambler can work with. 2 men decided to own all of them. One was an onion farmer from New York who had already lost a fortune trading wheat and had promised his wife he would never trade again. The other was a Chicago dealer with a produce company and a seat on the exchange. Together, they began buying, and they did not buy paper. They bought onions. Boxcars of them rolled into Chicago all through the autumn. By the end of the year, the 2 of them were sitting on something in the region of 30 million pounds of onions in cold storage, and they controlled roughly 98% of every onion in the city. Then they went to the growers with an offer. Buy our onions at our price, or we will dump the entire stockpile on the market and wipe you out. The growers bought, and while they were buying, the 2 men were quietly betting against the very market they had just cornered, building enormous positions that would only pay out if the price of onions collapsed. Then they dumped the onions anyway, all of them. The market did not fall, it cratered. A 50-pound bag of onions in Chicago dropped to about 10 cents. The sack was worth more than what was inside it. Farmers across the country were ruined. Some of them drove to Chicago just to stand and watch it happen. Congress held hearings. A young congressman from Michigan named Gerald Ford, who would one day become president himself, sponsored the bill that banned onion futures outright. The head of the exchange fought it bitterly and said that the plan amounted to burning down the barn to find a suspected rat. The bill passed anyway, and that is why, to this day, the onion sits alone in American law, the one crop nobody is allowed to bet on. But the onion story does not start in a Chicago warehouse, and it does not start with garlic in a jar on a supermarket shelf either. It starts thousands of years earlier on a hard, dry mountainside in Central Asia with 2 plants that nobody has ever gone to a restaurant to eat. This is the history of onions and garlic. Our story begins in the mountains of Central Asia, in the country running through what is now Iran and Afghanistan, and up into the ranges beyond. Hard winters, thin soil, long dead seasons where nothing grows at all. A plant that wants to survive there has to store its food underground. That is what a bulb is. It is a pantry. A tight ball of swollen leaf bases packed with sugar and water, buried just below the surface, waiting out the months when there is nothing above ground worth having. And there is a strange hole in the record right at the start. Botanists have searched for the wild ancestor of the common onion for a very long time, and they have never conclusively found it. There is no confirmed wild population anywhere on Earth. As far as anybody can demonstrate, the onion you eat exists only in cultivation. Somewhere back there, we took a plant out of the world, and it never went back. Garlic went further still. Cultivated garlic has more or less given up on sex. Most varieties produce no viable seed at all. Every clove you have ever peeled was broken off a bulb, pushed into the soil, and grown into a copy. Not a child, a copy. Which means the bulb of garlic sitting in your kitchen is, in a real and slightly unsettling sense, the same individual plant that somebody in Central Asia first pulled apart with their hands before writing existed. Split, planted, hand to hand to hand for thousands of years without a single break in the chain. It has been alive the entire time. From there it traveled, and it traveled beautifully, because a bulb is a plant with luggage. It keeps for months. It survives being dropped. It grows in almost anything. Clay tablets from Sumer, more than 4,000 years old, already list onions and garlic in the temple rations. And in Egypt, it became something close to holy. Egyptian workers ate onions constantly. They appear in the tomb paintings, in the offerings, in the ration accounts, and they were put inside the dead. Onions have been found in the body cavities of mummies, in the chest and the pelvis, and one pharaoh was prepared for burial with onions pressed into his empty eye sockets. When the tomb of Tutankhamun was opened, there was garlic in it. Why is honest guesswork? The rings of an onion, circle inside circle with no visible end, may have suggested eternity. The smell may have been thought powerful enough to wake the dead. Or it may simply be that they believed it was the strongest thing they had, and the place the dead were going was dangerous. There is an old story about the pyramids. A Greek traveler, writing 2,000 years after they were built, claimed that a guide had shown him an inscription on the side of the Great Pyramid recording the exact sum of money spent on radishes, onions, and garlic for the workmen. It is a marvelous detail, and it gets repeated constantly. He could not read hieroglyphs. He was taking somebody else's word for what the carving said. Believe as much of it as you like, but bread, beer, and onions really were the ration of the Egyptian laborer, and that ration lifted the stone. One Roman writer claimed that the Egyptians swore their oaths on onions and garlic, holding them up the way a man in a courtroom now holds a book. Whether that is precisely true or not, it tells you where the vegetable sat in their minds. It was not a side dish, it was what you reached for when you needed a thing to be binding. The Greeks fed garlic to athletes before competition on the theory that it made a man stronger, or at the very least made him harder to stand next to. Roman soldiers ate it on the march and planted it in the fields of every province they occupied, which is one reason garlic still follows the old Roman roads across Europe. And at the same moment, something else begins, and it is a thread that runs unbroken for the next 2,000 years. Garlic became a class marker. Roman writers sneered at it. The poet Horace wrote an entire furious poem about garlic after being served it at a dinner party, calling it worse than hemlock and complaining that it burned him from the inside out. Read it and you can hear what is actually going on. Garlic is what soldiers eat. It is what farmers eat. It is what the poor eat because it costs nothing and it makes bad food taste like food. And you can smell it on a man from the other side of a room. It follows him home. It is on his hands the next day. The smell of garlic is the smell of somebody who works. And for the next 20 centuries, an enormous number of people who did not work would use it to tell the difference. And in Korea, garlic went into the founding myth of the nation itself. The story tells of a bear and a tiger who begged to be made human. They were given a bundle of mugwort and 20 cloves of garlic and told to stay out of the sunlight in a cave for 100 days and eat nothing else. The tiger gave up. The bear endured it and was transformed into a woman, and her son became the founder of the first Korean kingdom. Sit with what that story is saying. To become human, you must survive on garlic in the dark. It is the oldest description of this plant anybody has ever written, and it is more accurate than most of what came after it. Some traditions banned it outright. In strands of Buddhism, in Jain practice, in parts of Hindu monastic life, the alliums sit on a list of forbidden foods, sometimes called the 5 pungent roots. The reasoning is the same everywhere it appears. These plants heat the blood. They stir up anger, appetite, desire. A mind that is trying to be still cannot be still with garlic in it, which is a remarkable claim to make about a vegetable. It is also, as it happens, a fair description of what the chemistry is doing to you. It went to sea too. A bulb keeps for months in a dark hold, and that made onions and garlic standard provision on almost every long voyage in history. When Columbus crossed the Atlantic, they crossed with him and were planted in the Caribbean within a couple of years of his arrival. They spread across 2 continents faster than the people who had carried them. In medieval Europe, the onion did the work of a currency. It kept, it traveled, and everybody wanted it, so onions were handed over as gifts and, in some places, accepted as rent. Garlic, meanwhile, went into the medicine of everybody. It was hung in doorways against sickness. It was chewed against plague. It was crushed and pressed straight into wounds. Legend says that during a plague outbreak in Marseille, 4 thieves were caught robbing the bodies of the dead, and that they bought their lives from the magistrates by handing over the recipe for the vinegar they had been soaking their clothes in. Garlic was in it. The story is almost certainly an invention dreamed up to sell the vinegar, and you can still buy the vinegar today. But underneath the nonsense, something real was going on, and in the 19th century, somebody finally checked. Now here is the part of this story that most people never learn. In 1858, Louis Pasteur put garlic juice next to bacteria in a dish and watched the bacteria die. It was one of the earliest clean demonstrations anybody had ever made that a plant could kill a microbe. And here is why it works. An intact garlic bulb is chemically silent. It cannot hurt anything. Sitting whole on your counter, it does not leak, it does not sting. Inside its cells, it keeps a harmless compound in one place and an enzyme in another, walled off, and as long as the plant is whole, those 2 things never meet. Break the cell with a knife or a tooth or the jaws of an insect, and the wall comes down, and the enzyme finds the compound, and in under a second, the plant manufactures a fresh chemical weapon at the site of the wound. In garlic, that weapon is aimed at microbes, and it is one of the most effective antibacterial substances ever found in a plant. In onion, it is aimed at your eyes, which is why cutting one makes you cry. You are not making the onion weep. The onion is making you weep. It is being eaten and it is fighting back, and it builds the poison fresh at the moment of the injury every single time. The armies took this far more seriously than the doctors did. By the First World War, the British government was buying garlic by the ton. Field dressings were soaked in garlic juice and packed onto wounds in the trenches, and the reports coming back said that infection rates fell. In the Second World War, when the Red Army ran short of antibiotics on the Eastern Front, they went back to garlic and used it exactly the same way. The soldiers gave it a nickname. They called it Russian penicillin. There is a story from the American Civil War that gets told alongside all of this. It says that in 1864, General Ulysses Grant sent a telegram to the War Department declaring that he would not move his army another step without onions, and that 3 trainloads arrived the very next day. It is a wonderful story. It is very likely not true. Historians have gone looking for that telegram in Grant's papers, and it is not there. The earliest printed version anybody has managed to find turns up decades after the war in a vegetarian society's newsletter attributed vaguely to an unnamed officer. But like many legends, it survived because it points at something real. Onions genuinely were shipped to Civil War armies in enormous quantities. Field hospitals genuinely did use onion juice on wounds, and an ordinary soldier in 1864 genuinely did know, in a way that no doctor could yet explain, that the men who ate onions got sick less often. Then, in 1928, real penicillin was discovered, and by the 1940s it was being made in industrial quantities, and garlic went straight back into the box-marked folklore. For the next half-century, if you told a physician that the thing in your vegetable drawer killed bacteria, you were a crank. Which was convenient, because by then the class war over the smell had crossed an ocean. When the great wave of Italian and Eastern European immigration hit America at the end of the 19th century, the garlic came with it, and America built a slur out of it. Garlic eaters. It turns up in the newspapers, in immigration debates, in ordinary polite conversation. teachers told immigrant children to stop eating it so that they would not offend the other children. And the children listened. A generation of Americans learned to be ashamed of what their grandmothers cooked. For decades afterwards, mainstream American cooking had almost no garlic in it at all. The mid-century American cookbook treats it as a hazard. Rub the inside of the salad bowl with a cut clove and then take the clove away. Suggest it, do not commit to it. And when garlic finally did come back into the American kitchen, it came back deodorized, dried, granulated, powdered, sealed into a little jar with most of the chemistry cooked out of it so that it could be used without smelling of anything a neighbor might notice. And then, quite suddenly, America changed its mind. From the 1970s onward, Italian food and Chinese food and Mexican food moved from the margins of American eating into the center of it, and the garlic came with them. American garlic consumption multiplied several times over inside a generation. A town in California called Gilroy, which had been growing the stuff quietly for decades, started a garlic festival in 1979 and declared itself the garlic capital of the world. And hundreds of thousands of people showed up to eat garlic ice cream in a field. Inside one lifetime, the smell went from a mark of shame that got children bullied at school to a thing people queued up and paid money for. Nobody apologized, nobody mentioned it. The country simply started eating garlic and pretended it always had. Meanwhile, the onion was quietly learning how to bring down governments. In India, the onion is the base of nearly every meal cooked in nearly every home, which means the price of onions is not a line on a chart. It is a household emergency, and Indian politicians know it in their bones. In 1980, soaring onion prices helped Indira Gandhi pull down a sitting government. She called it the onion election. In 1998, prices went vertical again. Opposition politicians walked into parliament with onions hung around their necks. A satirist in the north of the country staged a fashion show with models wearing garlands of onions, and that December, the governing party lost the state elections in Delhi and Rajasthan. It had held Delhi for 5 years. It would not hold it again for the better part of 3 decades. And in 2019, prices ran up several hundred%. The government banned onion exports overnight, and Bangladesh, which buys most of its onions from India, was thrown into a crisis sharp enough that its prime minister announced in public that she had told her own cooks to stop using them. A vegetable that costs almost nothing, that nobody thinks about, that has no lobby and no glamour, can still shake 2 governments inside a single week. Garlic went the other way. It became a matter of tariffs and smuggling. China now grows something in the region of 3/4 of all the garlic on Earth, most of it out of a single eastern province. Since 1994, the United States has held an anti-dumping duty against fresh Chinese garlic, and the headline rate is enormous, in the region of 370%. It has been reviewed again and again for 30 years, and it has never been lifted. Around that tariff has grown an entire shadow economy. Relabeled cargo, shell exporters, garlic shipped through third countries to disguise where it came from. At one point, 2 British men made millions of euros moving Chinese garlic through Norway and into the European Union to dodge the tariff. There are people who have gone to prison over garlic. A bulb that costs a few cents has generated one of the longest-running trade disputes in American history, and it is still running. And then, in 2015, this story turned all the way back around on itself. A scholar of Anglo-Saxon England at the University of Nottingham was reading a 10th century medical book held in the British Library, a collection of remedies known as Bald's Leech Book. She found a recipe for an infected eye, garlic, a second allium, onion or leek, wine, and bile taken from the stomach of a cow. Mix it in a brass vessel, leave it for 9 days, strain it. She carried the recipe down the corridor to a microbiologist, and they made it. It killed the superbug. Methicillin-resistant staph, the hospital infection that modern antibiotics struggle to clear, died in the presence of a 1,000-year-old eye salve, in the dish and in a living wound model at rates reported as high as 90%. And it only worked as a whole. Take out any single ingredient and the effect fell apart. The wine mattered, the bile mattered, the 9 days mattered. Not one person who wrote that recipe down had the faintest idea what a bacterium was. They knew that if you crushed garlic into wine with cow bile and waited 9 days and put it on a sty, the sty went away. So they wrote it down, and it sat on a shelf for 1,000 years while we sneered at it. Which brings us, at last, to now. Onions are grown in more countries than almost any other vegetable on the planet, on the order of 100 million tons hauled out of the ground every single year. Garlic grows wherever people cook. We have even started trying to disarm the plant. In 2008, scientists in New Zealand switched off the gene for the enzyme that builds the molecule that stings your eyes, and produced an onion that can be sliced in the face without a single tear. It works. But that same sulfur chemistry is a great deal of what gives an onion its bite, so what you get when you take away the weapon is a milder vegetable. The plant does not get to keep the flavor and lose the fight. Neither, it turns out, do we. And here is the strangest thing about these two plants, the thing that has been true from Sumer to your kitchen. Almost every savory dish, in almost every cuisine, in almost every country on earth, begins in exactly the same way. Something fatty, hot in a pan, and then chopped allium. The French call it the base. The Spanish call it the base. The Chinese call it the base. These cultures agree on almost nothing else. They agree on this: you have eaten onion today. You almost certainly did not notice, and that is the entire point. It is the flavor you only detect by its absence. It is what makes food taste finished, and it is why a soup without it tastes like hot water with objects floating in it. So think back for a moment on the whole journey. A plant with no thorns and no poison in its leaves on a hard hillside in Central Asia, quietly packing sugar into a bulb underground and building a chemical trap around it. Onions pressed into the eye sockets of a pharaoh. Garlic in the tomb of Tutankhamun. Bread and beer and onions lifting the stone of the pyramids. A Roman poet writing a furious poem about the smell of a farmer. Monks banning it because it heats the blood. 4 thieves and a jar of vinegar. Garlic soaked into field dressings in the trenches. An American slur aimed at a smell. 30 million pounds of onions dumped on Chicago, and a law still on the books because of it. A 1,000-year-old eye salve killing a superbug in a laboratory in Nottingham. And finally, 100 million tons a year and 2 governments shaken in a week by the price of a bulb. It is one of the most extraordinary stories any plant has ever written across human history. And the strangest part of all is how ordinary it feels now. The bulb that fed the pyramid workers, that marked the poor and disgusted the rich, that dressed wounds in 2 world wars, and that is still, in the case of garlic, a living clone of a plant. Somebody pulled out of the ground before writing existed is now the most unremarkable thing in the world. It is waiting for you tonight, in a drawer, in a bowl, in a paper bag going soft in the corner, ready to be chopped into the bottom of a pan before the meal has even started. You will cut into it without looking, and it will burn your eyes, and you will not give it a second thought. But now you know what you are really holding. If this story surprised you, subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden histories behind the everyday things all around you. Drop a like if you learned something new, and leave a comment telling me which part of the onion story surprised you the most. There is a lot more history waiting to be peeled.